The judge called the defendant a model of stability. But the little girl in the gallery made a small, hidden gesture, a signal a tomb keeper, who guards the dead, recognized as a cry from the living. The air in the crown court was thick with the scent of old leather and the cold, sterile perfume of polished marble. Elias, a man of 30, sat in the back row, his stillness a stark contrast to the rustling papers and muffled coughs around him. He was a tomb keeper, a custodian of silence and stone, and this world of loud pronouncements felt alien to him. His suit, a simple charcoal gray, felt stiff and foreign. He was more at home in worn work boots, with the scent of damp earth and rain-washed granite on his hands. He wasn't here by choice. He was here because of a promise made to the dead. He cared for the plot of Eleanor Vance, a woman taken by a sudden illness, whose grave he tended with a quiet devotion. Her sister had sent him the summons, a plea to attend the guardianship hearing for Eleanor's daughter. "He's trying to erase Eleanor completely," the letter had read, the ink blurred by what looked like tears. "Please, just be a witness. Be a pair of eyes for her." So Elias sat, his posture as upright and unmoving as the headstones he straightened for a living. His gaze, accustomed to scanning for subtle shifts in the earth, swept across the courtroom. It passed over the bored jurors, the self-important lawyers, and the judge, a man whose face seemed set in a permanent state of mild disapproval. Then his eyes landed on the girl, and the air in his lungs went cold. She was seated beside the defendant, a man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass. The girl, Cora, couldn't have been more than 8. She wore a pristine white dress with a perfectly tied sash, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, tight braid. But it was her posture that seized Elias's attention. She sat with an unnatural rigidity, a stillness that didn't belong in a child. It wasn't the stillness of patience, it was the stillness of a statue, a monument to something unseen. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her small back ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on a point on the floor. She was a child trying to take up no space at all. Elias had seen that kind of stillness before. He'd seen it in the faces of grieving widowers and heartbroken parents who stood before a fresh grave, trying to hold themselves together against a storm of sorrow. It was the stillness of survival. The man beside her, Alistair Sterling, the girl's stepfather, placed a hand on her shoulder. It was meant to look reassuring, paternal. But Elias saw the girl's shoulder muscles tighten, a barely perceptible flinch. Sterling leaned in, his lips moving in a whisper, his smile never reaching his cold, assessing eyes. Suddenly, as if feeling the weight of his stare, the girl's head lifted. Her eyes, wide and dark and ancient, met his across the cavernous room. It was only for a second, a brief, shocking jolt of connection. In that fleeting moment, Elias didn't see a child. He saw a prisoner. He saw a silent plea from a soul trapped behind a wall of glass. Then, as quickly as it came, the light in her eyes was extinguished. She looked away, her focus returning to the floor, the monument perfectly restored. But the crack had been revealed. Elias leaned forward, his promise to the dead now a fierce, burning duty to the living. He would watch. Alistair Sterling took the stand, moving with the fluid confidence of a man who believed the world was his stage. His voice, when he spoke, was a finely tuned instrument, calm, reasonable, and dripping with manufactured sincerity. He was answering his lawyer's questions, painting a portrait of himself as a pillar of strength in a time of tragedy. One must provide structure, Sterling was saying, his gaze sweeping across the jury with a look of profound earnestness. After my late wife Eleanor's instability, Cora needed consistency above all. She needed a routine. Stability. That is what I have given her. The words were perfect. Structure. Consistency. Stability. They were good, solid words, the kind that built foundations and earned trust. But Elias, a man who dealt in the final, unvarnished truth of epitaphs, knew how easily words could be used to build a cage. With every utterance from Sterling, he saw Cora shrink a little more into herself. The man's voice seemed to carry a physical weight that only the child could feel, pressing down on her, making her smaller. The judge, Sir Alan Carmichael, nodded with solemn approval. A commendable philosophy, Mr. Sterling. Discipline and order are the cornerstones of a healthy upbringing. At the word discipline, Elias saw Cora's small hands clench in her lap. Her knuckles went white. It was a tiny, fleeting detail, missed by everyone except the man in the back row who spent his days noticing the slightest cracks in marble. Sterling's lawyer continued. And during the period of your ex-wife's illness, were you the primary caregiver for Cora? Absolutely, Sterling replied, his voice resonating with false humility. I took full responsibility. It was my duty. Cora needed a firm hand, a guiding presence. I provided that. There it was again. Firm hand. The words hung in the air, beautiful and brutal. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had been a paramedic before the quiet of the cemetery had called to him, a life spent responding to the aftermath of violence masked by pretty words. He knew what a firm hand could mean. As if on cue, Cora shifted slightly in her seat. The sleeve of her pristine white dress slid up her arm by less than an inch. On the pale, delicate skin of her forearm, just below the wrist, was a mark. It wasn't the mottled, messy bruise of a playground fall. It was a collection of small, distinct circles, a faint, sickly yellow-green, clustered together in a pattern that looked unnervingly like the imprint of an adult's fingers, gripping too tight. The woman beside Cora, her new stepmother, noticed it at the same time. With a practiced, seamless grace, she reached over, ostensibly to smooth a stray hair on Cora's head. But her fingers deftly slid down and tugged the white sleeve back into place, concealing the mark from view. The movement was fluid, casual, and utterly chilling. Cora didn't react. She didn't even blink. She just continued to stare at the floor, a perfect, obedient child. The tomb keeper's heart hammered against his ribs. The facade was cracking, and underneath, he saw something dark and rotten. The trial droned on, a parade of carefully selected witnesses who came to polish Alistair Sterling's halo. The headmaster of Cora's prestigious private school took the stand, a man with a booming voice and a self-satisfied air. Mr. Sterling is a model parent, the headmaster declared, beaming at the defendant. Always involved, impeccably dressed, a generous contributor to our annual fund. I've never heard him raise his voice. He's the very picture of paternal devotion. Elias tuned out the man's rehearsed speech. His focus was entirely on the small, silent figure in the white dress. Cora's hands were folded again, her thumbs tucked into her fists, her jawline trembling with a tension that betrayed the calm of her posture. She shifted again, a small, restless movement. This time, the sleeve on her other arm slid up. This bruise was different. It wasn't faded, it was a fresh, angry purple, oval-shaped and stark against her skin. It was precisely where a thumb would press to restrain a struggling arm. The stepmother, her face a mask of polite interest as she listened to the headmaster, seemed unconcerned. Her hand rested on Cora's shoulder, a proprietary gesture, a claim of ownership, not of comfort. Suddenly, Cora looked up. Her eyes, wide and desperate, swept the courtroom, searching, pleading. They found Elias. For a second time, their gazes locked. The message was no longer a vague sense of unease. It was a piercing, silent scream, "Do you see?" Elias gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Just a slight dip of his chin. "I see." A flicker of something, relief, or perhaps terror, crossed the child's face before the stepmother noticed the exchange. With cool, reptilian speed, she leaned in, her body shifting to block Elias's view as she whispered something sharp and urgent into Cora's ear. The girl immediately flinched and dropped her gaze. The court took a brief recess. As Sterling rose, he walked past Cora, his hand dropping onto the back of her neck in what looked like a casual, affectionate pat. But Elias saw the girl's entire body go rigid. He saw her wince, a sharp intake of breath so small it was invisible to anyone not watching with the intensity of a hawk. That sealed it. This wasn't just a man lying, it was a predator, confident in his cage. When the judge re-entered, he cleared his throat, a gravelly sound that echoed in the tense silence. "Before we proceed to closing arguments," he announced, his voice full of gravitas, "I wish to acknowledge the commendable composure Mr. Sterling has shown. His restraint in the face of these unfortunate allegations is a testament to his character." The judge then turned his gaze to the little girl. "And I commend the child for her quiet decorum. It is not easy to sit through such matters. I trust she understands she is in good hands." Elias felt his own hands curl into fists. The judge's praise was a final, unbearable layer of varnish on a rotten structure. Cora's eyes dropped lower, her small body seeming to collapse under the weight of the lie. Then, she moved. It was so subtle, so slow, it was almost invisible beneath the drone of the judge's voice. Her left hand, the one with the faded bruises, lifted to her face as if to brush away a strand of hair. Her fingers touched her cheek. And then she did it. Her hand formed a fist, thumb tucked inside. She pressed that fist into the open palm of her other hand. Once. Twice. To the untrained eye, it was a nervous fidget. A child's meaningless gesture. But Elias knew better. From his time as a paramedic, from the trauma seminars he'd been forced to attend, he knew exactly what it was. It was the international signal for help. A silent, desperate plea from a victim who cannot speak, who is being watched, who is in immediate danger. He had seen it once before, on the trembling hand of a woman trapped in a wrecked car with her abusive husband, who was telling the rescuers she was fine. Cora lowered her hand, a look of profound, heartbreaking defeat on her face. She had sent her signal into the void. But the tomb keeper had received it. A cold, electric calm washed over Elias. The kind of calm he'd felt as a paramedic arriving at a catastrophic scene, when the chaos was so absolute that the only possible response was focus. The girl had spoken to him in the only language she had left. To ignore it would be to bury her alive. The tomb keeper, the guardian of the silent, rose from his seat. He made no sound. No shuffling of feet, no rustle of fabric. One moment he was sitting, the next he was standing, a solid, unmovable presence in the back of the room. His movement was so quiet, so deliberate, that it was more disruptive than a shout. Heads turned. A ripple of confusion spread through the gallery. The judge, lost in the rhythm of his own voice, didn't notice at first. And in this context, we must weigh testimony not on emotion, but on its legal merit. Your Honor. Elias's voice was not loud, but it cut through the courtroom's stale air like a shovel through hard earth. It was calm, firm, and impossible to ignore. Judge Carmichael paused mid-sentence, his brow furrowing in irritation. He peered over his spectacles. Yes. Who is that? This is not a public forum for interruptions. Elias took a step forward, into the aisle. He didn't rush. He advanced with the measured, deliberate pace of a man walking a coffin to its final resting place. My name is Elias Thorne, he said, his voice steady. I am the caretaker for the grave of Eleanor Vance. And I am bound by duty to respond to a soul in distress. The judge blinked, his rhythm broken. I don't care if you're the royal executioner. This is a court of law, not a churchyard. Sit down, or you will be held in contempt. A bailiff near the door shifted, his hand moving toward his belt, but he hesitated, unsure. Elias did not move. The child, he said, his voice gaining an edge of steel, the girl seated next to the defendant, has just given the international distress signal. I witnessed it clearly. A collective gasp swept the room. A juror, a middle-aged woman, turned to stare at Cora, her face a mask of confusion. The girl herself was frozen, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a dawning, impossible hope. Sterling's lawyer shot to her feet. Objection. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. This man is not a qualified witness, he's a groundskeeper." "I am not testifying," Elias replied, his eyes locked on the judge. "I am intervening." "You will do no such thing," the judge snapped, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "That child is under the legal and proper guardianship of Mr. Sterling. There is no cause for this circus. Sit down. Now." Elias took one more step. "I've seen that signal before, Your Honor. On people who were taught that silence was the only thing that kept them safe. That little girl is screaming for help in the only way she can." "Enough," the judge roared, his voice cracking. "You are not qualified to interpret a child's fidgets from across a room." He waved a dismissive, patronizing hand toward the defendant's table. And then, he made his fatal mistake. He sealed his own fate with a single, arrogant sentence. "That child is with her guardian," the judge said, his voice dripping with condescension. "She is fine. She knows her role is to remain quiet." Remain quiet. The word struck Elias like a physical blow. His entire life was dedicated to honoring the quiet, to giving dignity to the silent. To hear that word used as a weapon, as a tool to cage a living child, broke something inside him. The courtroom held its breath. Elias advanced. 2 more steps, smooth and silent. He stopped 5 feet from the bench. "The only place she belongs," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "is far away from him." "Bailiff," the judge shrieked. "Remove this man now." In that instant, Alistair Sterling turned his head and gave Cora a slow, triumphant smirk. A look that said, "See? I told you. No one will ever believe you." That's when Elias moved. It wasn't a wild swing. It wasn't born of rage, but of a cold, absolute certainty. It was a single, precise, fluid motion. The slap echoed in the vaulted chamber like a gunshot. The flat of his palm connected sharply with the judge's fleshy cheek. Sir Alan Carmichael stumbled backward, his glasses flying from his face, his expression one of pure, uncomprehending shock. A wave of shouts and gasps flooded the stunned silence. The bailiff froze, hand half drawn. But Elias didn't press his advance. He simply stood his ground and turned to look at Cora. Her eyes, wide and brimming with tears, were locked on him. The spell was broken. The statue had come to life. With a cry that was torn from the very depths of her soul, she stood up, scrambled from her chair, and ran. Cora ran. She ran past the stunned, outstretched arm of her stepmother, past the frozen tableau of the jury box. Her small feet in their polished shoes made no sound on the thick carpet as she crossed the courtroom floor, a small, white blur of motion. She wasn't running from something, she was running to something. She collided with Elias's side, her arms wrapping around his waist with a desperate strength, her face buried in the rough fabric of his suit jacket. She didn't sob or scream. She just held on, clinging to him like a drowning sailor to a piece of driftwood. Elias instinctively wrapped an arm around her small, trembling shoulders, turning his body to shield her from the chaos he had unleashed. "Detain that man. Detain him now." Judge Carmichael's voice, now a high-pitched screech, finally broke through the din. His cheek was a blotchy, furious red, the perfect imprint of Elias's hand beginning to bloom. He fumbled for his gavel, striking it against the bench with a sound that was more panic than authority. A male bailiff finally moved, stepping forward uncertainly. But he stopped. His eyes were fixed on the small girl clinging to the man who had just assaulted a judge. He saw the way she hit her face in the man's side. He saw the angry purple bruise on her arm, now fully visible. And he did not advance. "Someone get that child away from him," the stepmother shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. "Cora! Get back here this instant." "She's not going anywhere," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the unshakable weight of a granite monument. It was the voice of a man who would not be moved. It was a female bailiff, stationed near the jury box, who became the first crack in the dam of official procedure. She didn't charge. She moved with purpose, stepping calmly over the low railing and approaching the pair. She knelt, bringing herself down to the child's level. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Officer Davies. Can you look at me for a second? You're safe." Cora didn't move, her grip on Elias tightening. "This is insanity," Sterling shouted, finding his voice at last. "She's been manipulated. She's terrified of the man who just attacked an officer of the court." "She's terrified of you," Elias stated flatly, without turning. "I saw her flinch every time you touched her. I saw her bruises. And I saw the signal she made." "What signal?" Carmichael sputtered, clutching his cheek. "I saw nothing but a restless child." "She showed the universal hand signal for distress," Officer Davies interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise with calm authority. She looked directly at the judge. A closed fist, pressed into an open palm. "It's taught in schools and shelters. It's used by victims of violence who can't speak openly." The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was no longer about a man assaulting a judge. It was about why. That's preposterous," the judge stammered, but the words were hollow. "I saw it," a voice called out. It was the juror, the middle-aged woman. She was on her feet, her face pale but determined. "I saw her do that hand thing. I didn't know what it meant, but I saw it." A second juror, a young man in the front row, stood up. "I saw bruises on her arm, too. When her sleeve rode up." "She never looked at him," a third juror added. It was like she was trying to disappear. The courtroom was no longer Sterling's stage. The audience was no longer passive. They were witnesses. The alliance was forming, a chain of ordinary people choosing to see what they had been encouraged to ignore. Sterling's face drained of all color. The trap he had so carefully set for everyone else was now closing around him. Officer Davies gently took Cora's arm. "Sweetheart, did Mr. Sterling hurt you?" she asked softly. In the shelter of Elias's embrace, Cora hesitated for a heartbeat, then gave a single, sharp, definitive nod. That was all it took. The female officer looked at the nearest constable. "Detain Mr. Sterling and his wife. We need social services and a child forensic team here, now. This is an active child protection case." As two officers moved toward him, Sterling's mask of civility finally dissolved into pure rage. "This is a violation of my rights. You have no warrant. I am her legal guardian." "Not anymore, sir," a plainclothed detective said, appearing as if from nowhere and flashing a badge. "Right now, you're being detained on suspicion of child endangerment and coercive control. We have probable cause, multiple eyewitness corroborations of abuse, and an active distress signal from the child. That's more than enough." The stepmother began screaming, a torrent of accusations and threats, as she too was restrained. "This is a conspiracy. You're siding with a maniac who assaulted a judge. This court is adjourned." Carmichael yelled, pounding his gavel weakly. But the sound was drowned out by the murmur of a courtroom that had chosen its side. As officers led a struggling Sterling away, his eyes, filled with venom, found Cora's. "You will regret this," he hissed. Elias took a half-step forward, blocking his view. "You'll fight it from a cell," he said quietly. Later, in a small, quiet room away from the chaos, Cora sat on a padded bench, wrapped in a gray police blanket. She was sipping a juice box, her small legs swinging slightly. She looked, for the first time, like a child. Elias sat on a chair nearby, a bandage on his knuckles. She looked up at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but clear for the first time. "You saw me," she whispered. He nodded. "You made sure I did." A small, fragile smile touched her lips. "Will you be in trouble?" "Probably," he admitted without hesitation. "But if I had to do it again, I'd have stood up sooner." She considered this, then leaned her head lightly against his arm. The door opened and a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice entered. "The child advocate." It was time to go. Cora stood, but clutched Elias's sleeve until the very last second. Just before she turned to leave, she rose on her toes and whispered, her voice full of a newfound strength. "When I grow up," she said, "I want to be like you. Someone who speaks for the quiet ones." Elias watched her go, not taken, but led toward safety. He knew there would be hearings, investigations, and consequences. But as the door closed, he felt a profound sense of peace. The tomb keeper had spent his life honoring the silent dead. But today, he had given a voice back to the living. What would you have done if you were in that courtroom? Do you believe one person has the right to break the law to prevent a greater injustice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and please, always comment with respect for the difficult nature of this topic. If this story moved you, tap the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the rules. And please, share this video. You never know who might need to see that signal, or who might be the one to recognize it.